action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, business and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp, and I'm Giles Edwards. Today, I've caught Mark Earls. Dubbed by the Do Lectures as Britain's answer to Malcolm Gladwell without the hair, Mark is a prolific thinker, behavioural science buff, recovering account planner and best-selling writer. Putting his remarkably brilliant brain to good use, he ran major departments in agencies both large and small, from St Luke's to Ogilvy, penned plenty of influential industry tomes, including Herd and Copy, and today Mark consults on human behaviour and behaviour change. He says the space we need to worry about is the space between people, not the space between their ears. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Heidi.
Right, number one, Mac or PC?
Mac.
London or Frankfurt?
London.
St Luke's or Ogilvy?
St Luke's.
Ziggy Stardust or the Thin White Duke?
Ooh. Well, at the moment, it's more German Berlin era Bowie for me, so Thin White Duke.
Nice. Learn or unlearn?
Unlearn.
Copying other people or outsourcing the cognitive load?
Outsourcing the cognitive load, because I love that phrase.
Same. I'm pleased you chose that. Right, last one. There's always one ridiculous one. Jack Wilshere or John Wilshere?
Oh, John Wilshere every time.
Easy. You sailed through those, Mark. Welcome.
Hello. Nice to be here.
Lovely. So to start the show, we always ask every guest about their path to where they are now. So can you tell us, how did it start for you?
It started for me in Mr. Patel's Indian grocery shop opposite the church where I grew up in North London. And that was my first ever job. And I was really shit at it. Because I understood nothing about either the English names for spices or the Urdu or Hindi words or Gujarati words for them either. So I had no idea. So I was really useless. Later on, when I left university, knowing not what to do with myself, I been working as a tour guide during the holidays. And so I carried on doing that for a bit, taking Americans around Europe and emptying their wallets of their dollars, which I really enjoyed.
Whereabouts were your tours?
It doesn't really matter. Where would you like to go? I'll take you there, as the song says. I really don't mind. Yes, I did find myself going to places I'd never been to before and having to pretend that I'd been there before. But one of the first things we were taught in tour guide boot camp was how to ask in whatever language country you find yourself in, how to ask, look at me, hello, don't point when I ask you this question, but pretend you think you know me. Where is the museum? Stroke train station, stroke papal residence, stroke whatever it might be. Yeah, so we learned to bullshit quite well early on.
Oh, wow. And did you say that was post-university?
It was during university and after as well. And I really didn't know what I was going to do. And to be honest, my drinking buddy, when I was in my final year, because I did languages and philosophy at university, in my final year, my drinking buddy, who introduced me to the martini, Jamie, who was very, very posh, said to me, after 6 months of him doing a graduate trainee job at FCB, which I think that's part of Publicis now, he said, listen, I hate this advertising lark. It's so superficial. I'm off to be an investment banker. But I think you'd like advertising. So, which I thought was not really very flattering. But I then...
None taken.
It's exact point taken. So then I went off and applied. I wrote 60-odd letters and got offered a couple of jobs and started at Grey as a graduate trainee. But within weeks there was then days when they used to do proper training of people. And I spent a month in the planning department and I didn't want to leave. And I got adopted by the two brilliant people who were running that department at the time. Jamie Dow was my particular mentor, and then Leslie Walsh was the other one, who only retired a few years ago. And they took me under their wings and taught me how to do things. Like I did my first focus groups there and ran up a huge amount of money on the dial-up for TGI analysis on the computer. So I just loved that. And that's where I really started. It seemed to be a strange mix of creativity, analysis, and sort of detective work. Well, in one of the Father Brown short stories, Father Brown, the Catholic priest that Chesterton invented.
Yeah.
He says, the real secret of being a detective is to know that you, like the whoever committed the crime, the evil person is grim, is you are both sinners, and because you start from there, you can feel what it's like to be the person if you use your imagination. And so that was the third piece of the picture of me in working in advertising. Yes, creative, yes, analytic, used my brain in both ways. But also there was this thing about detective understanding what it's like to be this person that you're supposed to be targeting.
Before Jamie told you it was a superficial world of advertising, had you at all ever even been aware or considered the industry prior to starting at Grey?
No, not in the slightest, ever. I had no idea what it was or who was who, and just didn't, I thought maybe I was going to do a doctorate and something like that, and then I'd maybe find somebody would get me to write something. I don't know. I had no idea what I was going to do. I did try a few months sitting in a lawyer's office collecting debts, which was just shit.
As fun as it sounds, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. And being a tour guide was great fun. You have 50 people on the bus depending on you for, their very existence, and you telling them any old nonsense and they'll believe it. So yeah, but I couldn't do that forever, right? That was the thing. I said, I can't imagine being 30, but I certainly see some of these old lags running around like old rock stars who never quite made it, being slightly bitter and cynical about the world, and I didn't want to be like that. So that's where Jamie's prompt of you might like the superficial world of advertising.
Given you wrote 60-odd letters, it's not a bad place to end up, Grey.
It was really good. It was a bit dull at the time, to be honest. It was Grey by name, Grey by nature was what everyone said it was.
Is that right?
But it was really thorough. They had big sort of FMCG clients like Procter and Beecham's, now GSK, and some really lovely brands to work on. And then they also had Mercedes as well. They did the Mercedes top-end press stuff. So it was a really interesting place to be, and I met some great people there. Funnily enough, none of the three of us who started as graduate trainees that year ended up doing the account management jobs that we were supposed to do. So one is Kirsten Dougal-Biggs has run and now sold, I think, a research agency. And the other one, Tiggy Cadwallader, I think her name is. Tiggy went off and she was a successful commercials producer. And there's me end up as the HERDmeister, so goodness knows.
Fantastic. And how did you morph into the HERDmeister? At what stage did you start thinking beyond advertising and into society and behaviour and culture?
Great question. So I was told early on in my career, so my first proper planning job was at BMP, before it even became BMP DDB, what's now Adam Neve DDB. And I worked for Paul Feldwick, who was just the loveliest man. He intimidated the hell out of me because he was so smart. And I worked out later, also a bit shy. So, but he was a fantastic boss to have, because I used to tangle myself up in knots. And he said, listen, you just have to go and read. If you want to argue with Millward Brown or research agencies or clients about the strategies and the effectiveness, you're going to have to understand the models that lie behind their tools better than they do. So you have to go and... So basically I became a psychology and behavioural sciences geek, self-taught. And at that point, and that is sort of 2 or 3 years into my career. And I kept being interested in it. And I was lucky enough to come in through BMP and Paul in contact with Andrew Ehrenberg, whose name is led to the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, which generates so much noise at the moment about distinctiveness or distinctiveness and
like differentiation. And yeah.
But Andrew was brilliant, and he was the loveliest. He was the loveliest man. I interviewed him as a sort of tribute for my first book, and he spent ages doing the same basically the same calculations with data from different markets to show that there's some really straightforward things and that became real juice for me. So he, for example, taught me about how normally attitude change follows behavior change and not the other way around. And that's a really important, like, big principle. Normally, we don't take on information, think about things differently, and then decide to act differently. It mostly doesn't work like that. Mostly works the other way around. And we're grossly simplifying here, but the bias is certainly towards the way that Andrew describes it in all the work I've ever read, which is that we do stuff for whatever reason and then justify it to ourselves. And you know, well, in the 80s reunion movie, The Big Chill, Jeff Goldblum plays a cynical New York journalist, and he says post-rationalization, which is what we do when we justify to ourselves what we've just done, and create a new attitude. Post-rationalization is more important than sex, he says. And when did you last go for a whole week without a really juicy post-rationalization of your own behavior? We do it all the time, right? And I think that, so what I'm giving you is an example of the kind of thing that being a geek in behavioral science can really give you, a really useful principle. Because if that's the case, if behavior change is the predecessor, not the product of attitude change, then you start designing strategies differently. You start going, actually, what we need to do is make people feel this thing, or we maybe get people to do something and then give them the reasons to justify the choice they've made afterwards. And then you research things differently. You research the ad differently. It's not looking to persuade people as people still say now, but did then. It's not about getting persuasion going on. It's not even about awareness. It's about justifying to themselves the fact that this is something that people like me do. That seems like a good thing to do. So that's our kind of start point. And it really, from there, it continued and through the various jobs that I did. And when I got to St. Luke's, it's really interesting because I was elected a couple of times it was an employee-owned company at the time, which is very radical. And we scared the shit out of people because we felt and we acted deliberately a bit like a cult. No, we didn't have any offices. This is before hot desking. We didn't. Every employee owned a bit of the business, so it wasn't just the names above the door who benefited from any financial performance. In fact, we all allocated equally the same amount in each year. So if you're a member of staff, you get the same amount, whether you're the chief exec or whether you're the junior person. And also then we engage with other bigger issues. Like I did a lot of work with The Space, who are a brilliant contemporary dance place and just happened to be our neighbours, and therefore with the contemporary dance world. Equally did a lot of stuff because we were so weird. I found myself talking in the ad world about stuff, and it gave me a platform to give the market research world a good old bashing. I was once called the market research industry's public enemy number one, which I'm still really proud of.
That wasn't Jamie again, was it?
It wasn't. It wasn't. No, but I tell you what, it has turned out really interestingly. So I chose to because of being a planner, I chose to look at that and look at the ideas in the market research world, and to use that as a lever to open up other stuff, to open up the creativity of the business, to open up how we thought about bigger social issues, because we were effectively a social enterprise at St. Luke's, and to start to have conversations. We were doing amazing stuff. Just before I arrived, they did the first of the Blair policy launches. In fact, it was the Brown policy, but Blair Brown policy launches. So it was the New Deal for the unemployed, and having straightforward conversations because we didn't care, firing boots because they didn't meet up to our standards at Clyde, and having them follow me around for 18 months. Having told them, no, it's over. It's a bit like, I don't know if you've ever seen the reruns of Smack the Pony, that all-female comedy sketch show.
Love it.
So there's a character in that who won't accept it's over, holds on to the boyfriend's leg as he walks around the park and gets dragged everywhere. Because she could change, she could change. And that's what it was like, the marketing director that we worked with then. We could change, we'd give you this. No, I'm not interested. You're not right for us. It's not us, it's you.
I'm going to force a kind of rewind on you there. Going back to where you talked about working with Paul Feldwick.
Yeah.
A huge fan of Paul Feldwick, and I think most people listening probably are. Had the pleasure of welcoming him on the show last year.
That was a great talk. Heard that one. It was brilliant.
He was, funny enough, Paul's Barclaycard ads are one of the first ads I kind of truly remember as being just fascinated and inspired by.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Paul said to you something along the lines of, you have to understand the models better than they do.
Yes.
And you may have already hinted at an answer because you latterly then talk about behaving more like a cult. But how do you manage the conversations that then happen when you understand models better than the person you're communicating with? Because there's inevitably going to be some friction.
So absolutely. So I think, again, just as with the discussion about how communication works, I think when you're having, you're looking to change the behaviour of somebody that you're working with, it's not about persuading them to do something. You need to understand why they are doing X, Y, and Z. What's the assumptions they've got going on? There may be some personal shit going on, like they don't want to feel embarrassed, they don't want to be shown up, and that's always really important to remember, right? When you're trying to get anyone to change their behaviour, any negotiation. And then you get them to do stuff. Yes, could we just try this? Yes. Keep your standard questions. But I'm really interested in the issue about, for example, would you tell your friends about it? Or instead of this is for people like me, is it for lots of people seem to be using this kind of thing nowadays? That kind of, because that was, if I'm in my herd mindset, that would be the kind of thing I'd be talking about. So you have to both understand the models better. You have to understand why people are saying what they're saying, both at the conceptual level, but also at their personal motivations, and never make anyone look stupid if you can help it. I have done, I'm afraid, once or twice when I've lost my patience. And thirdly, give them something to do which allows them to then move on action, and then we can review it later. Isn't that a useful metric? Yes, it turns out. What a brilliant idea, Millwall Brad, to use that. Aren't you clever?
Yeah, it makes complete sense. I love it. Brilliant. There's one fundamental truth that I want to dig into, and I am mindful of, as I said to you before the show, before we started recording, that it is a path that you have trodden numerous times, but it is something that I think is significant, and that's that fundamental truth of we versus me.
Yes.
Can you explain to our listeners that truth and how, we're wrong to think of ourselves as truly individuals?
Okay, so I think the simplest way to think about it is to use the story of how it came about. One of my heroes is a woman called Wendy Gordon, who was a researcher, the same generation as Paul Feldwick. Absolutely brilliant researcher and innovator in the world of marketing and market research. Absolutely brilliant. She recently retired a few years ago. But she was a real inspiration to me and a mentor as well. And she wrote a paper in about, I think it must have been 2000 for the Market Research Society, and it got a lot of coverage, and I was blown away. It was called The 21st Century Consumer. And I loved that idea, the 21st century consumer. And I thought, bloody hell, what can I say now? Because I was going to do something like that. And I mused on it for a bit and then just looked at the words. And as so often happens when these things happen, it's when you're least expecting it that the thing gets unlocked. The 21st century consumer, as if it was just one person acting on their own. And at the time, I'd been doing a lot of work across cultures in various ways, and it just occurred to me that maybe that was the thing. Maybe it wasn't, maybe the whole thing was about we in the West, in the Anglo-Saxon world, assume that the right level of observation for humans is the individual, acting independently on their own. In fact, we say when people, your mum tells you off, you'd run under that bus if your mates told you to. And you go, yeah, I would, yeah. And that's because we're social creatures, not individuals. The rest of the world, whether it's the Latin world, whether it's Africa, whether it's the Middle East, whether it's Asia, whether it's indigenous tribes in North America or in Southern America, wherever you look, most other cultures outside the Anglosphere treat human beings as fundamentally a social creature rather than an individual. But we have this illusion, right? And that seems wrong to us. And there are two reasons why it's an illusion. One of which is that our culture tells us, no, you should be an individual. You should make your own mind up. You shouldn't do what other people do. You shouldn't just take it for granted that other people are right. You shouldn't just follow whatever some influencer says on Facebook. You shouldn't do that. You should make your own mind up. Consider the facts and make a good choice. So that's the one thing, it's our culture. The second thing is we only experience the world as if it was us making decisions. You know that I very often have the conversation with people who don't work in advertising, or even people who do. Sometimes I've had this conversation, say, of course, I'm not affected by advertising me. It doesn't work on me, advertising. I choose the best thing. The best thing is the thing that I research it really well and I choose the best. And that's all very good. But, later subsequent work I did proves that is just not true in virtually any market that I've ever been involved in. So we had this illusion of I, which comes from our culture and comes from our actual experience, the way that our cognitive mind is created in our experience of our lives. We had the illusion that we're in control, and yet the rest of the world says no. So we're a we species with the illusion of I.
And funny enough, you just reminded me in terms of the kind of social aspect. We recorded an episode with Kirti Nair, who's wonderful. She's now at Publicis. She was at Kellogg, and she told the story of trying to launch, I think it was the pyramid tea bag, into it may have been an African culture. Excuse me if I've got that wrong though, Kirti. And they thought they found the idea of making a cup of tea for one just completely baffling and contrary to their own reasons and experience of making a cup of tea as a kind of social process and a social thing. And I just always loved that story. And as you alluded to there, is that experience of other cultures and parts of the world where you can actually really see some truth.
I think the problem is, so let's put aside the sort of the physiological sort of brain science bit of it for the moment. The cultural bit, I think, is really important. We often don't see that because we swim through culture like a fish swims through water. It's just there, right? It's just obvious. Like the way you lay stuff out on the plate is one of the easiest ways to think about this. That's what a dinner looks like. In most of the Anglosphere, a proper dinner, unless you go in fancy and foreign, is a piece of protein, a carbohydrate, and one or more other things, vegetables.
Yeah.
That's it. And it's all arranged on one plate. Now, in many other cultures that it's not just that isn't the main ingredients of a meal, but also it's not the way that you organise. It's not 3 separate sections with different bits in it. There's probably lots of sections, and quite often none of them have a protein in it. It's just how it goes. And sometimes it's all protein. And sometimes it's mostly carbohydrate. Think about Italy and pasta. I mean, so my point is that basically when you're swimming through a culture, you don't see it. And you need to take this sort of alien perspective and go, why the hell are they doing that? What's that about? Why do we think that is natural? I'm always very suspicious, and this is one of the few things that my philosophy undergraduate studies gave me was a suspicion of what the from nature arguments. It's the natural thing to do. And it's always a bit of a post-rationalization, always ignores the fact that there's probably a heavy dose of culture in there. And culture is the most magnificent thing, and the thing that we don't put into our models of how human beings operate. Because it's hard. It's really hard. And it's hard to get to grips with. If you've done any work, for example, I'm writing a book at the moment about time, done any work across cultures, you'll know that actually the notion of a time to meet is very different in different places. In Mexico, there's this thing called the Mexican hour, which is not an hour. It's mostly in Mexico, but it just can be any time, really. It stretches from maybe up to 3 hours either side. Or you look at how people use time in the workplace. I've done a lot of work in India in the last few years, and I particularly in Mumbai. And what's fascinating to me is to see my American colleagues getting really frustrated with the way that the Indians faff around, as they might call it, actually something more direct than that. But that actually social interaction is a key part of the workplace and achieving tasks. And tasks can be, the timing for tasks is not about achieving them efficiently, it's about doing them in a certain way that's really important to people in that culture. So I think cross-cultural stuff is a big bit missing from our map, and I am fed up to the back teeth of those of the behavioural economist maps that are produced, which always have as if everything was in the brain. And culture is such a big deal, and it's more important than we can possibly imagine, and we don't realise that we follow it every day.
I'll just say quickly, I lived in Indonesia for a couple of years, and I'm very familiar with rubber time.
Right. Oh, well, there you go. Rubber time is another great example. It's just, and it's and that's so we talked about two things: we talked about food and we talked about time. Let's now think about attractiveness. What makes sexual attractiveness work in different cultures? If you go to the National Portrait Gallery, you see it changes over time in the UK alone, in the English upper classes. But then you go across culture and you go, it also sometimes changes really fast, sometimes slow, but it's always different from quite what we thought.
Does it also affect the means in which we communicate and the context in which we communicate? Because there's a lovely quote from you, which I'll just read now. We are a we species who do individually what we do largely because of each other. And I wonder, were you a very early cynic, for want of a better word, of the kind of one-to-one digital ad targeting technologies?
Yes, sir. 100%. I was an early cynic of it, and that was one of the theological struggles that I had with the Ogilvy world, who are obsessed with selling CRM programs to corporates, particularly with trying to get D2C CRM working, which it really rarely does still. So yeah, I'm really wrong. I think people in the advertising and marketing world mistake the means of communication for the mechanism that lies behind it.
Right.
So, and let me explain that. So, television is, yes, it has certain characteristics. It's video normally, and it's got audio on it normally, and it's broadcast. Mechanic behind it has historically actually been quite social, in that we know that it's a public thing. It's and that other languages like French and Spanish use publicity rather than talk about advertising. Letters can be fantastic, and I loved the Royal Mail. My team at Bates did I saw this and thought of you work, and I did with John Wilshire did the stuff that leads the Royal Mail campaign right now, which are about a real medium, it's something that's tangible in a word of digital stuff. So it's really important, but the mechanic is not targeting, is not efficiency, is not just reach, which is what the TV people might say. It's how people use the thing that you're giving them in the channel that they're using and how they're using that channel. So that's much more important than television has got high definition.
Yeah.
Or you can find, seriously, you can use some really clever stuff to make your door drops more accurate. Just so uninteresting. The real thing is how people use the thing that you give them, and in the medium that they're using it, and how that fits into the rest of their lives, and particularly the decision making or lack of decision making around the thing that the category you're working in.
There's another interesting point on that that's just popped into my head, and I feel like because I've lived through it as you have, and probably countless of my listeners, the idea that you're all watching television at the same time as everyone else, and being able to say to someone the next morning, "Did you watch whatever it was at 9 p.m. on ITV?" It's kind of gone with the way TV is typically consumed nowadays, and there's a huge thing that's missing now because of that, and something that we actually. I was quite lucky in something we started during lockdown called Isolated Talks.
They were brilliant, by the way. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. Great idea that Jess Gregson had, which was introducing a kind of community of people listening to music at the same time, was then adopted by Isolated Talks. So it was kind of a collaboration of sorts, but credit goes to Jess, not me, for that one. And it was amazing how powerful it was to know everyone was listening to the same music at the same time.
Totally.
And it feels strange that we almost need to justify that with logic to battle, if you want, the debates that might be happening in boardrooms as to why we should be looking into that type of media and experience over something that's more targeted. But I guess that comes back to your advice from Paul Feldwick and your great answer to how do you have those conversations without friction.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have been rude to the direct marketing world repeatedly.
I don't doubt that for one second.
But, that's, I choose my provocations deliberately when it's the time then to have after the provocation we can deal with something. But I think that's right. I think that I say to talk's a brilliant example of that. I was in a car dealership this morning because they've I don't know if you have a car with a key fob that you can lock remotely.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of those. And there's been lots of cars. I had one stolen a few years ago by someone hacking the key fob. So there's been some security breach, there's computer update and blah, blah, blah. So I had to take it in this morning. And I was talking to them while I was waiting for them to do this. I was talking to one of the sales guys and a customer. And these two guys were bonding over that the third series of that, what's it called, that brilliant series about Southeast London.
Top Boy.
Yeah, and I watched 2 series of it, haven't watched the third one yet. And the sales guy was just raving about it. It's just brilliant, and the other guy saying, "Just don't this, man. I'm waiting till the weekend. I'm going to binge it." And what was interesting about that is that it's still a social object.
Yes.
And when you experience it, you're not just experiencing it on your own. It won't be literally simultaneous to everyone else, but you know that other people either have or will experience this thing, and it'll be a shared cultural reference point. I mean, that's what content like that does, and like lots of things in our world do. Give us social, enable social interaction, enable social identification, enable us to draw lines between this group and that group, enable us to stay sane in the world of nonsense that that most modern life is to know that there are other people out there.
Yeah.
And it's a really, if we follow my sort of description of human beings as being fundamentally social and we species suffering the illusion of I, then you can see that just about everything we do is going to be shaped by other people, real, present, distant, remote, imagined, conjured, stereotyped. It doesn't matter. We're still using other people in ways to live our lives and create meaning from the stuff that we do. And we find lots of opportunities, which is why, it's not just that, as Blur once said, modern life is rubbish, but the live music scene in the UK, despite the best efforts of the brewers and the landlords during the lockdown, has continued to boom. Festivals are just extraordinary phenomenon now. Mm-hmm. It's not just that, a small part of the population go off to Reading. I never did do Reading, but I always hated that kind of thing. But, there's huge, it's a thing. People go, and they go on their own as part of the ritual of leaving school or college, and they go with their friends for years, and they take their kids, and it's a thing. Live music is such an important thing for people. And why we want to do things like, watch movies in the summer, movies in the park, or whatever it might be. It's such a big deal for humanity, and because of who we are. And that when we think about media choices, we need to remember that that's a really powerful mechanic that lies behind whatever is the medium you're thinking about.
Definitely. I adore stand-up comedy and spend a lot of my time watching stand-up comedy, but I can't watch it if I'm on my own because I don't find it as funny.
See, that's fascinating. I like that. I'd not thought about that before, but I completely agree. I think there is a thing with the doom scrolling that people do. You see as a clip from this. I'm not sure how much of a laugh you get if you are mentally viewing this on your own.
Yeah.
Clip from, some comedy store thing.
I think I probably find it just as funny. I don't enjoy it in the same way. I think it's probably the difference. I don't know what the subtlety there is. I'm sure you can work it out.
I think that's right. So I've pondered for a long time with the rise of people like Bill Bailey and so on, the sort of the mega comics of the English language, and I found it really hard. The DVD products seem really strange because the whole point is not to watch it just the once if it's a DVD, right? And you can watch it on your own, and you don't have that feeling that you have being surrounded by other people. Really good mate of mine is a brilliant actor, Danny Sapani. And he and Adrian Lester did a two-hander at the Almeida Theatre just before lockdown. They'd had it written by Adrian's wife and rehearsed it and were about to launch, and then lockdown happened. And so they choreographed it for it's a two-hander, re-choreographed it to be done as a live stream during lockdown, which they did, and it was brilliant. And then it was the first thing the Almeida Theatre put on afterward. And one of the things that it reminded me, whilst I love the show, and it's a bit like watching good telly with a mate, really good telly, when you see a live cast from the live stream from a theatre like that. But when you're sitting in the audience, when you're sitting there and you feel with below a level of conscious thought, you feel other people's reactions. It's an entirely different experience. And I'm talking about theatre here, but I think the same is true of comedy and of music. That there's something really important. It's why the Greeks, for example, created those amphitheatres. It wasn't just so the voice could carry it, so that you could sense other people's experience.
Yeah, I'd never thought about that.
It's a key part of it. Other people are everything. And much as they lead us astray, it is everything. It is our lives. And sort of accepting that, I think, is a really important part of being human, getting out of this Anglo-Saxon bubble that so twists our views about the world and then our actions.
I again mentioned to you before we started recording, we've had an incredible amount of listener questions that have come in, and I feel just from skimming them now that we're going to revisit this topic at least loosely in a few minutes' time. So before we do revisit this topic, because we've got more time to dig there, I want to talk about copying.
Yes.
Obviously, you've written copy. What got you interested in the concept of copying when it comes to creativity?
I guess I'm quite contrarian. So on the one hand, when someone says to me, this is how it is, I really want to just dig around and see, is that the case? Just as I responded to Wendy Gordon and Ginny Valentine's paper, The 21st Century Consumer, I said, there's something else there that you're not seeing. The is the answer. Let's focus on that. So in this case, I was also prompted by the endless twaddle about originality and the genius of my mates who happened to be in the creative department rather than in whatever department I worked in at the time. And this infantilization of the creative genius, in particular in ad agencies, was something that used to really get my goat. Why can't they book their own train tickets? What's wrong with them? You too can make coffee. You do when I'm not here. Why don't you do that? So it's that kind of stuff that really just got my goat. So when prompted by that stuff, I started to think, so how does creativity really work? And at St. Luke's, we were really keen to embrace and champion creativity in all its forms. And we did some really cool and some really stupid stuff. But one of the most important things that we did was make it easy for people to take responsibility collaboratively for a project. So, we pass responsibility for having ideas way down the process and way down the hierarchy, and make sure that, the young people really do, you support them. And one of the things that I noticed in doing that was that this idea of copying, we were terribly worried, these young people, they go, oh no, that's something that's been done before. And so it's copying, it's not original. And you're just reading around it very quickly, you discover that's not how either things spread through populations, ideas and so on. They don't spread through being completely original. Everyone's standing up and saluting and go, well done, you are a genius. It's totally original. And no artist of any worth has ever suggested as much. Picasso, as Faris and Rosie will tell you, was very fond of stealing from other people. And, T.S. Eliot said, the point is not whether the difference between a great poet and an average poet is not whether one steals and the other one doesn't, is that what they do with the stuff they steal and where they take it from. And so it became more interesting to me. And as I was doing more innovation work after Ogilvy, I found myself just being really frustrated with the frustration people had, going, well, that's not really original, is it? And go, well, nothing is, really. So that's a long way around to say, listen, copying is a central part of creativity, innovation. It's how things spread through populations, more importantly. And even more importantly than that, and this is sort of where the behavioural science comes in, it's how we learn almost everything that we learn in our lives. From when we were kids to how you ride a bike. Yes, there's some personal experience in there, but it's actually by copying other people. And we do it all the time. We do it without knowing that we do it. We do it without even being prepared to admit it to ourselves much of the time. So copying, and I use the word copy, deliberately provocative. There are lots of other words I could use, like emulate, or social learning is the good euphemism in the social sciences. But stealing is a nice provocative one. But I chose copy, and I wrote a book saying copy, 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 to make it triply provocative and unacceptable to people.
Time, weather, and... We interrupt this podcast as we thought your ears had suffered enough of the monotone ramblings of the host. Now this is a voice. Most pods drop an ad into these interruptions. Not Gasp. We won't awkwardly nudge you to contact the pod's host at giles@gasp.agency to talk client retention and brand positioning, like other companies did just the other day. Let's get you back to the show.
The story starts, she said with glee, with a wizard chimpanzee.
Oh, the beautifully voiced Gem reading Gasp book. Adele writes an ad there, but not what we're after. Hang on.
Funny enough, I was going to mention Rosie and Faris when I put the question to you,
right.
more specifically Genius Steals. But I didn't want to lead you down a particular path, but I'm pleased you went there. And there's a quote that I, funny enough, was going to use in your intro, but I was aware that it didn't really make as much sense out of this context. But I still love it, and I'm going to say it now. Think about what kind of problem you're trying to solve and who else in other fields and other contexts might have faced that same kind of problem. I love the idea of what kind of problem, and I think I've heard you just say what kind of thing is it that we're trying to solve here.
But that's what a triage nurse or medical team does. What kind of problem have we got here? And therefore, what kind of ways should we go about treating it?
Yeah.
How should we approach this? And treating every problem as unique, which is very flattering both to the problem owner, the client, and to the geniuses, the absolute stone-dead geniuses who are only people in the planet who could possibly solve this problem. It's really flattering to everybody involved. But frankly, it's not a problem that is unique and has never happened before.
Do you think that is the problem then, ego? Do you think it's like an ego reason why we don't talk about copying? And we don't mean copying, we don't mean plagiarism, and I think you've made that very clear. But do you think it is ego that makes us uncomfortable with the idea of...
I also think it's our culture of individualism in particular. So see what I did there, I moved from psychology
Yes.
to culture.
I'm glad someone knows how to control it.
That's really, I think the big deal is our culture is about individualism, about uniqueness, and yet we do like to refer to traditions, but they're separate from having ideas and solving problems. And we have heroic figures who solve problems, whether they're creative geniuses or engineering geniuses, or Semmelweis is the guy who discovered ways to make hygiene in hospitals much, much better. Mark Rylance is playing him on stage in London at the moment.
I went and saw it last week.
Oh, did you? I'm on next week, so I'm looking forward to it. Is it good?
I could watch Mark Rylance walking around a room talking to himself, and I'd love it.
I can watch Mark Rylance just sitting there.
I went without knowing what it was, just knowing it was Mark Rylance. Genuinely, yeah. I adore him. But yeah, it's fantastic, and it's a story I wasn't familiar with, and I'm pleased I am now.
It's a great story, right? So there's a genius guy working against the system. Nobody believes him. He has to try this and nobody do that. That's a great heroic story, and that's what our culture loves. That's not true in all cultures, and all cultures actually, other cultures a lot of the time would actually describe their story slightly differently. But that's our culture, that we like to tell the story of the unique genius who solved this tricky problem, fighting against a hero's journey, blah, blah, blah. Honestly, that's how we think about it. And we need to be wary of those kind of culturally hidden, invisible cultural assumptions about how the world is and the kind of thing that makes sense to us. Again, back to it feels natural that someone who would be really clever and smart and brave would keep doing this thing, and eventually everyone would realise what a genius he was. Just be wary of things. When you come across stories like that, just be wary.
In terms of examples of copying being at the heart of creativity, I was listening to a podcast that you recorded, I think about 5 years ago now, and you told a brilliant story of Professor Martin Elliott,
Yes.
who effectively took those protocols from Formula One pit stop crews and took that into the paediatric wards of cardiac surgery with huge, like incredible positive effects, right? So it's not when you talk about what kind of thing or what kind of problem this is, you do really mean taking a problem from one context and lifting it quite far away from that original context.
I think that's right. I mean, T.S. Eliot's thing about poetry, great poets not only copy and do something with it, but they take it from a long way away, the furthest place you could possibly imagine. And I think solving a problem in cardiac surgery in Great Ormond Street and therefore around the world by going to Formula One pit stops that's a long way. It's a really long way. And that's the kind of thing that you need, I mean, by what kind of problem. That's what it enables you, asking that kind of thing. I've got to say, my friend John Wiltshire hated that phrase when I started using it, kinda. Really hated it just because he felt this is just cheap and American, and which reveals something about his cultural preferences. Love him. But he eventually accepted it, and it's just a useful artifact, a marker when you have a conversation or you're doing a project or working with people to remind you we need to triage this problem, triage the brief, in order to then to have a good chance of finding new and interesting solutions. And if we don't triage the brief, we're just throwing things against the wall and see what might or might not stick.
Yeah, I think I was about to try and empathise with John there, which I perhaps not sure if I truly do, but I think there's lots of issues in our industry where language is overly dressy, and there's something so brilliantly accessible about what kind of problem or what kind of thing is this.
Well, I'm glad you think that, because that's one of my sort of, I don't know whether it's a passion, it's a mission, I guess, is to give people tools, better tools for thinking about things they're doing and better tools for doing the things they're trying to do. I don't know when it happened to me, but at some point I realised that whilst I was pretty smart and pretty inventive, I no longer had to be the smartest person in the room. If anything was going to change, other people would have to feel they were smart. And so my role went from being the genius. I can still do that if you pay me enough and I've got enough gin. But actually my job is to help other people. And I guess that's the writing and the talking and the workshops and all that comes from. Help other people see the world differently, give them different tools. Herd was, I guess, the big breakthrough on that book, because it gave people a different map of how the people they're supposed to be dealing with actually work.
Yeah,
and some tools to do it, and some examples of how you might use that new map to create new value.
Yeah, it's a good mission to have. I'm going to go to listener questions now, Mark.
Oh, where are?
Asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger, but that's not stopped us asking. We've got a bumper catch to put to you, and I'm going to start with your good friend John Wiltshire.
Yeah.
John says, it's easy to fall in line with the, quote, everything is changing more quickly than ever narrative. What are 3 things that aren't changing? And Matt Ballantyne added, or even what 3 things are going backwards. So let's start with the first.
Well, 3 things that are not changing. So the first one is that human beings aren't really changing. We are who we are. And whilst it does seem like a lot of stuff has come into our lives in the last 100 years, 50 years, 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, we're not really changing. We're still human. There's some stuff that you might look at the edges, things like, it's now possible to detect changes in DNA from within one generation, which is really interesting for dealing with some diseases, cancers in particular. But largely we're not, and we do love, particularly in our culture, distinguishing between generations on the basis of attitude or behaviour. And I think that's really unhelpful because it's largely not true. It's just an excuse to bully millennials, but, they all deserve it. And so that's one thing that's not changed. Human beings, we are social creatures. We always have been social creatures. We like being together. We also hate being together, and we like building tribes against each other and finding excuses to patrol the borderlines between those tribes. That's never going to change. Secondly, our brains are still the same as they always were, so that despite we have more stuff, more choices in front of us, we still use the same mechanisms that we used before. And that's where the work of, the people like the Kahnemans and so of this world come into play. There's also something we wrote about with Alex Bentley and Mike O'Brien, two academics that I did I'll Have What She's Having with. We dealt with a world of many choices, and the truth is that much of the time these choices aren't considered in the way that we imagine they are, but people just go, oh, that one I had last week, yeah, let's do that again. The one I know of, yep. The one that everyone else uses, yep. The one that we use, yep. The one that everyone seems to be talking about. These are really simple descriptions of how individuals make decisions, and they then also map up on the basis the data that we've got from the choices that people make in lots of different markets. They map really clear into that very simple four box that we 2x2 that Alex and I invented and stuck in that book. So people don't change. People are people, and the same human mechanics are there. Context might change a bit, so culture can change often a bit faster then, and the number of stimulus, but we still have the same mechanics underneath. So that's one thing. Second thing that's not changing is people bemoaning the advance of technology and what it's doing to us, how it's ruining our lives. It's a really interesting thing to consider how the ancient Greeks were complaining about this, Plato complained about. What's going to happen when people no longer have to remember stuff, when they can use that writing thing, writing stuff down, recording and keeping notes? What's going to happen to us? Destroys humanity. My dad has this terrible thing about tattoos, which he always says the barbarians at the gates when he sees a member of the family with a tattoo. And that's that cry of barbarians at the gates is something that we hear again and again about technology. And the third thing that's not going to change is that we as an industry are incredibly excited about whatever just new shit has just appeared, more so than we could possibly be, and we are almost always wrong in our predictions about what actually happens. The result, we're neophiles, and it's lovely to see, and it's very rewarding for anyone who's got some little new flashing light thing. But that's not going to change either, because that's the culture in which most of us in this kind of industry work.
Yeah, good answer. Yeah, we're all part magpie in this industry, it seems.
Yeah, no, totally. And we always want to know the latest thing. I mean, there's an underlying thing here which is to do with human nature, which is that we see it in an oversupplied world and over-informed world, is that we want complex problems to have simple solutions. So, Brexit is a great example of that. Simple solution to everything that's going on in the world, in my life, and everything. Brexit. Simple solution to those Mexicans coming over, gun laws. Simple solution to the lack of respect for me in my late middle age as a white man, abortion, whatever it might be. You see what I mean? And that's something to do with our approximate brain. It's what Daniel Kahneman called the lazy brain. By the way, I was the first person in marketing or business to include his lazy brain model in a textbook.
Nice. Gareth K asks, what's the most dangerous fallacy masquerading as fact in business or marketing, and how do you excise it?
So listen, I've got a thought here that will probably upset quite a lot of people.
Great.
That is to do with some of the stuff we've been talking about, which is what goes on between your ears is mostly bollocks. And we keep assuming that it's the important stuff. I would really like us to get rid of anything to do with cog science, because most of it hasn't been replicated. Most of it is based on samples of American psychology undergrads. And based on assumptions that are derived from Anglo-Saxon culture. So I think we'd like to believe that psychology and behavioural economics suddenly gives us the key to everything, and it hasn't. It's a very partial view that's culturally limited.
Awesome.
Is that rude enough?
Yeah.
I mean, also let me say, One thing I really want to get rid of, really want to get rid of, is effing brain scans.
Okay.
Brain scans. Jesus. If I have to see another fMRI scan picture, see, this is lights up here. You go, and what do you expect to happen? Jesus. Some activity in the head. No, really. In that sort of area he knows to do with that. Yes, really. That doesn't change it. It's like a reductionist thing that if it's top trumps, It also is often based on a really, really dodgy understanding of what that image is. That image isn't a photograph or a film. It's a reconstruction of inputs to a machine which creates this image of a brain. And the actual fMRIs are based on the iron that's in your hemoglobin showing up because it's more magnetized. That's what it does. Magnetic resonance, or I think it's magnetic resonance machine. That's what it's about. So can we have no more brain scans, please? And no more this lights up or left hand, right hand brain? It's just bollocks. Honestly. Shut up.
The thing is, if you show someone a brain scan, it immediately looks very credible, doesn't it? Whatever you then accompany that rationale with.
I wonder whether we actually have to. You actually have to have a white coat on. So if you're going to if you're handling a radioactive substance, you have to have the gauntlets. So I think and be in a full hazmat suit. So I think you put a white coat on if you're going to do that, and then we can all tell that you're not, as they used to say in those toothpaste ads. Hello, I'm not a dentist, but. Hello, I'm not a brain scientist, but. Hello, I'm a neuroscientist, but I know bugger all about human behaviour because I'm a neuroscientist.
Matt Ballantyne, he asked, what modern marketing practice would you consign to history? So is it use of brain scans to support?
Yeah, brain scans and cognitive neuroscience. Mostly, I mean, there are lovely people that do this. Richard Shotton and Phil Barden and David Penn is brilliant at this stuff as well, interpreting the cognitive neuroscience and making sense of it. However,
funny enough, I did look and use an actual brain scan, and it was something that in one of Phil Barden's books, I think it was probably in Decoded, where he kind of used the term no-brainer when it was representing the kind of cognitive load, to use your words from that quote earlier, and why people will choose to opt for what is familiar, aka known brands, famous brands, whichever you want to use some Feldwickisms there, over something which is uncommon and unusual or unfamiliar even.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think, well, look, I mean, Phil's got a lot of that stuff going on, and he and I are mates, so he won't be upset by this. But I think generally speaking, we take a bit of neuroscience, which is in itself very partial, the cognitive bit of it. And how we understand that is often based on research that's been very poorly replicated, if at all. Joe Henrich, who is this brilliant anthropologist who is a prof at Harvard now, created this description, what he called weird samples that most social science, particularly cognitive neuroscience stuff, is based on. And weird is Western educated, industrialized, rich and democratic. In other words, it's basically Anglo-Saxon undergrads. And they're the least representative selection of the global population to reflect the rest of the population. And, 22-year-old hormone-ridden philosophy undergrad, honestly, no.
Yeah, it's a valid point, very valid point. Let's turn the mood up and field one from Tom Morton, who people will know from RGA. Tom asks, what are you most optimistic about?
I'm most optimistic about the people that have stuck it out in the ad industry and marketing. Some amazing people doing amazing things, and they've done it in different ways. So people like my chum John Wiltshire with his Smithery work I first knew him when he worked at a media agency, PhD, and we did some work together there, and subsequently I persuaded him to leave that. It's my fault, PhD. But he does amazing stuff, and people like him are creating new ways of doing what advertising agencies used to think they did. I think that's really brilliant. I think people that then go and create a better research tool whether it's the tracksuit guys you talked to in the last episode, or whether it's people like Phil Barden, who's an ex-marketer. I think, again, that's really good. That's really great. Those are people who are constantly innovating. One of my favourite is John Kieran, who is an ex-planner who started what's now System 1. And he was constantly looking for new ways because he didn't believe what he'd been told about how advertising worked. And he hated Millwall Brown with a passion and their tracking studies. So so people like that can constantly do it. And then people like who prepared to stand up and take a stand on shit, whether that's Cindy Gallop or Sarah Tate or whoever it is, they'd stand up and this is important. We need to do things differently. So there's a constant innovation there. My worry about that, optimism is sort of tempered by almost all of those people I've talked about don't work in agencies anymore.
Correct.
And that's the downside. It doesn't mean that people who work in agencies aren't innovative and aren't the ones who are going to make some change. But the really interesting stuff is coming from out with the agency world. And if I was sitting in one of the agency world industry bodies like the IPL, I would be significantly worried about the fact that we are no longer able to. If I was sitting at the top of WPP, I wouldn't be worried about that. I'd be worried about lots of other things. But it's a real big deal. How do you keep the agency world innovating from the inside and keep these people who are able to create huge amounts of value from leaving and going to do it themselves?
Yeah, no, it's a very real problem, and I think there's Ipsos data that would certainly back that point up and people's perception of ad execs, and it's something that we've been concerned about here, if I'm brutally honest. And I think the answer is, and maybe nodding back even to how you frame copying other people as outsourcing cognitive load, I think there's an argument that people are having to rebadge or reframe what it is they do and tear that agency sign down and call it something else, a consultancy or some form of practice, in order to carry on doing the same thing with more credibility, perhaps, or certainly more effectiveness at the end of the day.
I think that's right. So, but here's another thing, which comes back to the copying thing, which is there's a tendency, and I've seen it in various waves over the history of my history in advertising, a normative pressure. So we have to define, and when I started my career, what's an account planner was absolutely war zone as a debate. And, the people at BMP believed that nobody else could do it, and Applemead Vickers were terrible, and they really weren't as good as us. Anyway, they took one of our second-rate planners and made him planning director, blah. Just really, silly. And arguments, and then the APG was set up as an organisation to protect account planners who didn't exist in the safe places like BMP or Applemead or JWT. And it was a nice safe place to hide and away from the nasty people in agencies who didn't appreciate the truth of it. Account planning and its pure goodness would give. So there's a huge debate then, and then there were lots of rows about it, and then there were lots of rows again 10 years later, and then 10 years later than that. And right now I can see it again on the Twitter sphere, the planosphere, as Marcus calls it. There's lots of silly arguments about what's the exactly right way to do it and how you should conform to this, why this is the way. I think that's really unhelpful, and part of the issue that the industry has always faces is that its buyers would like to be able to buy something easily, and therefore have it in known quantities, sizes, and qualities. But that leads to commoditization, and ours is not a one size fits all. No one project is exactly the same as the next. And therefore I think we have to encourage diversity in the definition of what that job is. It makes it hard to hire if you have a particular take on what it is to be a planner, for example, or a particular view what it is to be a creative person. I was thinking about this when I was listening to that interview, the session you did with Laura JB, who's a good mate as well, and her story about coming through from being a fine artist, hanging out with fine artists, doing digital stuff, and then a bit in a free time doing that magazine, that Hyper magazine, was fantastic. And then finding a way through the agency world. What is it? And now she's chief creative officer. And what does that mean? What does that mean? Honestly. I mean, she is absolutely brilliant. She's one of the best people that I've ever come across in the industry, and I've done a couple of things with her, which have just been an absolute delight and eye opener. But these sort of very tight definitions that are supposedly generalised, universalised of what this is, how an agency does what it does, it's really unhelpful to what is essentially a craft business. And craft businesses, there's quite a lot of good literature on this, that craft businesses which have a very strict code eventually become really dead, less exciting than they were flat, and they don't get the talent. It's very the guy did the gift. I'm just looking at my bookshelf. Stay there. Too many books, too little time. So there's a notion that I know John Wilshire introduced me to a long time ago, which is that the good master needs to run an open house. In other words, people need to come and go from one workshop to another workshop, bringing different things as they go. And in order to make that happen, yes, you need to have some discipline within your little house, but you also need to have the ability to learn from different perspectives that are new to you and to pass on freely to other people the ways of doing things. And I'm just arguing, I think, for a much more idiosyncratic industry. When I hear people talk about the advertising industry, I think there's very few people involved, really. None of the organisations are really very big in the practical level. There's just, at best, a bunch of people sitting around the table trying to solve a problem for a client with pens. And to make some stuff, can we make some stuff, please? I think that we overcomplicate it, and we're a bit pompous about talking about the advertising industry or about the marketing industry, or I think things are rather less grown up and serious than we would like them to be.
Totally agree. Got a few more listener questions. I feel obliged to squeeze them all in. So let's go to good friend of yours and ours, Lisl Macdonald.
Oh, lovely.
Lisl asks, you're a lover of both language and languages. If and how has being multilingual helped you understand people, communication and culture?
That's a brilliant thing from Lisl. And I think she's a really great champion of this, speaking a number of languages, including Thai, which is just a world beyond me. So I think the answer to the question of how has being interested in languages and language helped me, I think it's really helped me. The second bit is help the language, the way we talk about things, I think has made me think harder about what we say and what we mean by what we say. And that maybe that's a bit too much English 20th century philosophy, worrying about words and what words mean. But I think it's really helpful to be really clear. And I do, whilst I do like a lot of long words, I also like, as you know, some really short ones because they're really easy to understand and usable by people. So hence we talked before about the kind of thing question. I think that's important. The second part of this then is languages generally. I think language, being interested in languages shows that you're interested in people who come from a different culture than yourself. In order to speak another language, you have to get under the skin of the culture of the people who speak that language. And, in my case, I did 3 language A-levels. And I did, but gave up another one at O-level. And since lockdown, I've been doing Welsh because my family are from there, but none of us speak Welsh. And I've done 800 and something days.
I love the Welsh language. My family's Welsh too, and similarly.
Oh, really? Really? Well, I think it's really fascinating that and challenging. It's not just stimulating intellectually in the way that elderly folk like myself are supposed to keep our brains going, doing crosswords and puzzles. I think it's this and that. But I think more importantly, it makes you think really hard about what are the assumptions that are here. How was it like to be a person who lives within this culture? And what are the strands of it? And that is part of the ongoing inquiry, I think, that I have had since I worked with Paul Feldwick, to be honest. I've really constantly on a quest to understand a bit more about how people do what they do. And it makes me read a lot. and listen to podcasts, but I read a lot. I spent last week in Mallorca having a reading week, but catch up on some books I need to get on top of for my next book. And it was brilliant. And I've come back with a notebook full of thoughts and ideas and references. But if you're not interested in languages, it's hard to be interested in the culture. It becomes a sort of conceptual thing. And it also keeps you apart from that culture. You need to sort of be immersed in another culture to feel your discomfort in order to understand where the walls and the ceilings and the doors are of another culture.
Yeah. That's fantastic. I might have told this story before, probably only once, which is rare for me on this podcast.
Good.
I spent some time living in Bilbao in Basque country.
Oh,
and when I arrived in Basque country, I thought I was arriving in Spain, which didn't go down too well with my Basque flatmates when I first moved in. To cut a long story short, I learnt literally only a handful of Basque words, including, thank you and the basics. And it was only when I used those words in a local bar that the whole town or the whole area I was based in Bilbao just welcomed me with open arms. Just even acknowledging this language of theirs was the right language, or even existed, I think, just completely changed their demeanour, their kind of willingness to accept that I was in their country. I mean, it was overwhelming, Mark. I literally just saw the hardened kind of stone faces all just turn into smiles and grins. It was so powerful and so fascinating. And there's probably a little bit more context, especially when we're talking about Basque country, to your points about language and learning language. But to me, it's always one that comes to mind.
Absolutely the same deal. When I go to work in somewhere like Colombia, which I've done a few times in recent years, or in Peru, I speak no Spanish, basically. I'm always really embarrassed about the fact I can't really speak Spanish, but I make an effort to have half a dozen really good phrases, because if I've got that, I can then at least reach out to people or get people to see that I'm open to what's going on. And I always go when I do long haul trips as well. This is another thing, because I'm constantly curious to find out stuff that I didn't know before. So I always say I'm going to have an extra day. Hopefully the client pays for this, an extra day in the location of, we're doing a workshop for a week, so an extra day. And what am I going to do with that extra day? I'm going to go and do something. A few years ago, I did a workshop for a bank with lovely people at System 1 in Joburg. And we arrived there on the overnight flight, and they all wanted to go to the hotel and do their emails. Now, I happened to have read a couple of days before that there's a cave that had just been not just excavated, but open to the public, where some of the earliest human remains had been found. And there was a new museum of mankind. It's about an hour out of Joburg. So I said, what we're going to do is we're going to go and dump our bags, lads. We're going to shower, and then we're going to go up there. And just having the interest, the curiosity to find stuff that you haven't seen before, it creates a different picture of the place that you're in. I think that when you do this thing about taxi to airport, silver tube, flying across the pond to another place, which is an airport, and a taxi to a hotel, taxi to the meeting to hotel, it's no life to live, and you can't possibly have any inspiration or understanding of the people you're dealing with unless you immerse yourself. So I did a thing, if I don't mind, I'll just go on this. I did a thing in Mumbai with a lovely client, a American client that's based in the UK. She's become a dear friend. And we were worried about this particular leadership team in India. We were quite smug about the fact that some of them had worked in consumer before, and they were trying to get them to build a consumer business out. And as you probably know, India is quite a caste-ridden society. And most people in senior middle management come from higher castes. It's fairly obvious. And their lives are cushioned from other people. So they thought they were going to spend a week in a darkened room with PowerPoint charts and flip charts and lots of sticky paper. But we opened it by actually telling them there was a line of tuk-tuks outside, and they were to go and spend the day understanding the life of the tuk-tuk driver, their family, and how money fitted into their lives and what kept these people awake at night, and so on and so on. And they had to come back and report. And one of the guys came back and said, and he was virtually in tears, look, I've never I've never really seen this. I've never really felt this. I go, these are your customers. These are the customers. They're not a C2DE manual worker, self-employed. They're not. They're people. And you have to like the people you're going to serve. And you have to find out about them all the time. You have to constantly do that. I often give people, set up senior execs with buddies that they can work with, they can listen to, they can find out what's going on in people's lives. It's not the same as formal market research or opinion poll, but what it does is create an empathy that's absolutely essential and encourages the curiosity.
That's fantastic. It's more what they take from that rather than worrying it's not a significant piece of research.
Yes, no, absolutely. It's not the same kind of thing, but that's not the point, right? We have the opportunity, if we are inventive and creative, to create different experiences for people, for them to learn different things. And a piece of market research, big or small, is a piece of market research that will be consumed in certain ways, unless you do something to help them consume it differently. So other experiences are equally valid, but different.
Perfect. I've got 3 more I'm going to try and squeeze in if your schedule allows, because we've got our 4 pertinent poses as well. So David Penn asks, back in the noughties, Robert Heath and Paul Feldwick published a paper called 50 Years of Using the Wrong Advertising Model. Has anything changed or got better since then, or are we still stuck in the era of persuasion advertising? He also asks, where do you stand on plain chocolate bounty bars, which is my sort of question. So maybe try on
Well, can we... No, I know Robert really well. I haven't seen him since lockdown, to be honest. And as you've heard, I'm a big fanboy of Paul, and I've worked for him before. So I think that I'll answer that question quicker, which is that I think that Robert and Paul had some really good things to say about the way that video communication, particularly television, works in our culture. I think that's, and I don't think anyone has understood that better. I think the problem is that since then, 20 years on, we've got a flood, a tsunami of performance marketing shit that uses the old model, which is basically beat people up until they respond. I think that's really persuade them then to buy. So bottom of the funnel, as they used to call it, even though there isn't a funnel really, but. So I think they were dead right. I don't think anyone's had anything new, but I think the conversation has now merged or swerved towards performance marketing shit, which is deliberate in this quarter now.
Yeah, I think people are starting to accept, what Ritson calls bothism and the need to have both.
Yeah.
And
I think it's good punch. Yeah, absolutely.
It's a good start.
And now to the bounty.
Yes, he did say, are they, as Peter Kay suggests, a signifier of sophistication and affluence?
They are, but as with Peter Kay's everything, it's also an ironic signifier. Ironic use signifier. So
okay,
make of that wheel, and it's there for a display because it's a signifier, not just to me. It's a signifier to everyone else. You'd almost think that we were social creatures, right? And we did stuff because of what other people do. I don't know.
I'm not a fan of bouncy bars, but make of that what you will.
Yeah, there you go. I know. I read that joke as well.
Okay, right. Nick Corsten asks. The late, great Sir Ken Robinson famously said in his #1 TED Talk that he believed, quote, creativity is as important as literacy. Surely not, but if so, why so?
I think he was right. I think that it is as important as literacy. I was lucky enough to meet the man a couple of times, actually, and he was absolutely charming. And his passion I share entirely. Literacy is really important, but literacy covers a number of things. Literacy, if you were to include the ability to access and make sense of what you've come across online, is one thing. The written page is another. I teach people when we're doing workshops how to read research, how to read desk research, how to create desk research and read what you come from that, how to read people's non-verbal responses. All of that is literacy, it seems to me, and I think it's really, really important. I am a book nerd, and I have far too many books myself, and I'm always reading. And I always have done as a child. I did that. It sort of to escape whatever else was going on at home. I escaped into other worlds and learned stuff. Now, without literacy, I wouldn't have any of that. And I always feel rather sorry for people who don't have that. So, and I do know people who have really struggled in their lives because of their literacy problems, because for whatever reason, they didn't get taught those skills. So I think literacy is really important, but creativity is, I think, one of those things that really makes us human. Without literacy, you don't get access to the what's learned by other people properly. But creativity is the ability to take stuff and make something with it. And it is one of the great gifts that we have inherited from our ancestors, along with all the stuff that they've written down. And it's something that I think the advertising industry could do with a good sharp rap across the knuckles for its persistence in thinking there's a department of people that are creative and everyone else isn't. Now, by that, I don't mean should we have creative accountants who make up numbers. No.
I'd love a creative accountant, to be fair.
I've got a brilliant accountant, but he's very inventive, but he's not creative. Or maybe I should put that the other way around. He is creative, but he does what an accountant should do perfectly, accurately. But he does ever think around a problem. And I think that's the creativity. Think about a solution. And in some ways doing the stuff that we have talked about in approaching the kind of problems that we deal with, thinking, what kind of thing is this? Where have I seen this before? What if we try that out? And no, it needs a bit more of that. So that's creative accounting, and I think that's brilliant. I also think happiness and creativity go together. Kurt Vonnegut, who was my go-to when I was a disaffected teenager, Kurt Vonnegut has a number of great pieces of advice, but one of them was, do whatever you do, go and read, watch, paint, draw, sing, make music, tell stories, whatever it is, go and do creative stuff, because that's what makes life worthwhile. It doesn't matter whether it's any good. That's the stuff that makes what... I've got a friend, so one of my besties is... he's an architect, a really successful architect, and his wife she's a marketing person, has worked brilliant suit in advertising agencies. He, as an architect, was told, before he was an architect, at 11, he was told that he couldn't sing, so he was told to mime in the school choir. So he always believed he can't sing, and unfortunately, he's become a drummer as a result. His wife was very musical, but was told around the same age she couldn't draw. So she went off and did a music degree. And they play in a band now, actually, in a couple of bands together, and they're really great. But for much of their lives, their skill set has been limited by what they were told early on, that you can't do it because you can't do it brilliantly at the level that we think you should be doing it. It's not the point of creativity is not always to solve problems. It's to engage the full human and to rehearse for the times when we'll need to solve problems. And that fulfills us, I think. Without that, life is pretty grim.
Yeah, there's that lovely line from this TED Talk that Nick references from Sir Ken, which ends, she's a dancer. And I think it gets me every time. But I couldn't agree more. It's really wise words.
I mean, you have a fine art background, right?
Yes.
Yeah. How many people in the ad industry have a fine art background?
Too few.
Yeah. And why? Because we got this silly idea that you have to do your education at university should be something that should be entirely devoted to your vocation. The job that you're going to be doing, the place you're going to fit in the economy later.
Yeah.
It's not meant for that. I don't think it shouldn't be. I think that we're becoming more and more functional in our thinking about education. Without people doing fine art, what do we have? We have a very dull world.
I had the privilege and pleasure of doing a guest curation for Rosie and Faris recently.
I have.
And I shared a story of an email my wife Sophie sent to Sir Ken Robinson a short while after we had the pleasure of working alongside him. So I won't do the story now, but I'll link to it in the episode because it's a wonderful story. But one of the things I was going to write about but didn't was one of my fine art tutors at Kingston. And he was one of the most creative, incredible, wonderful people I think I've ever met, called Chris Draper. Yeah. And he taught us, this sounds trivial, I accept, but it's one of those kind of what is creativity things. He taught us quite rightly, it seems that if you're wearing a fluorescent jacket, you can pretty much go anywhere you like.
Like, brilliant.
which is one of my great memories from university and learning from a fine artist.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant.
He was a photographer, and his work contained photos of buildings you knew that he should not have any access to, but that was his way in.
Oh, I love that. That's great. Great idea.
Yeah. The last listed question from David Wilding. He's being quite naughty here because he's actually squeezed a few into one. So I'll let you choose. I'll let you choose the part you want to answer, or maybe you want to race through all. I would like to know what advice Mark would give to Keir Starmer, what the best book he's read this year is, and what his favourite part of his trip to Munich to see Marcus was.
Okay, so I'm going to do that in reverse order. The Munich, the best part of that, apart from hanging out with Marcus, who is a lovely human being and a real inspiration, and he really pushed me, which I needed. So that was lovely. The real bit was Tommy the Trout. There's a trout stream that runs outside the back door of Marcus's studio, and it's a beautiful chalk stream, and there were trout in it, and one in particular, a big fat one, was sitting on the far bank, and every 5 minutes or so there'll be as he broke surface to take a fly off the top. That was the best bit, and one of my passions is fishing, and particularly trout fishing. So that was brilliant, but it was super calm and tranquil and spellbinding as a result. So that was really good. So working back from that, then the second question was best book I've read this year. I can say Dawn of Everything, which John Walsh and I have been banging on about for a bit. I read most of it last year, but then forgot, so I went back to the beginning and read it earlier this year. It's absolutely brilliant. David Graeber, who did Shit Jobs. I don't know if you came across that. He was a sociologist at UCL and sadly died a couple of years ago. His partner, David Wagner, was on the Empire podcast at the beginning of this latest series of theirs on slavery. The reason why Dawn of Everything is so brilliant is that it challenges a lot of our beliefs about what's the natural state of things. From the 18th century onwards, we believed that there was hunter-gatherers, then they had a bit of agriculture, so they stayed in one place, and then they went from that to cities and towns, and that's when kings and so on started, and then after that we've got the industrial world, and we got bingo, modern life. And they challenge so many of those things using archaeological records, and in particular, they show that the ideas of... They start the book with basically an account by the French Jesuits in the 17th century meeting Iroquois warriors in what's now Canada and North and the east coast of the States. The Iroquois warriors and others were just confused by the hierarchy and the control that the French colonialists lived under. Freedom was something they expected. You can't enforce anyone in one of those indigenous tribes to do anything. When they're an adult, that's it. We have to respect each other's decision. We have to talk about it until we come to a conclusion. If you still don't like it, then you can move away, and that's fine. The idea that there's someone in authority, we imagine there's got to be a tribal leader, a king, or a general, or whatever. That's just how we organise ourselves. The ideas of freedom that then subsequently the Enlightenment adapted really seem to be sort of a poor copy of what they did. Anyway, so you can see what a geek I am about this shit. The important is it challenges some of our assumptions about what the natural order of things is. And I think that's something that anyone who wants to make a difference in our world needs to have. There are lots of other things you need. You need, commitment and ability to get out of bed in the morning and humility. You need friends. And Vonnegut said, best advice is join a gang, any gang. So we need all that. But you also need this curiosity. You just need it again and again and to just see beyond whatever you're told.
Perfect.
So that's two. Number one, Keir Starmer. Number one thing. I quite like that, the LED displays that you see now on bus stops in the London area. And I saw one recently in somewhere else in the UK, which says a bus will come in these number of minutes.
Yes.
As opposed to the timetable. I think that's a really good thing to take on board, which is having a public thing so that we see each other seeing it. This is going to impact at this point, rather than we promise just to build, some castles in the sky. Second piece of advice I'd give him is go read Günter Grass, German novelist who wrote The Tin Drum. He wrote a great book about his time with the Social Democratic Party, working with them in the late 60s, early 70s when Billy Bragg was the chief there. And he calls the book From the Diary of a Snail. And I always think it's a really good metaphor for any progressive cause. I've used it with people like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth and animal welfare people like Humane League International. When you want to make change in the world, when it really matters to you, when it's your passion, when it's what you die for, just accept it won't happen in the way you imagine it would. That change is going to, A, be much slower, and B, it's going to be really confusing and annoying. It'll move like a snail in one direction, slower than you want it to, and then it'll move slightly in the other direction. You just have to be sure and just keep pushing it towards the long-term goal you're aiming for, and just accept along the way it won't be perfect. Too many progressive movements, whether it's in the sustainability area or in social justice, look for the perfect solution. And there is no perfect solution. We have to do stuff now, make a difference, do it better, change direction slightly, adjust it, move on. That's how you create real lasting change. It's true inside companies. It's true when you look across industries. And it's true when you look across societies. So From the Diary of a Snail, please, Mr. Keir. He's my MP, actually, so maybe I should send him a copy.
Amazing. Well, we got through all of those listener questions.
Well, good.
So the final part of the interview is our 4 pertinent poses we put to all of our guests. Number 1 being, what advice would you give to your younger self, Mark?
Have more fun.
Perfect.
This is, we're so lucky you work in something like advertising. It's just so much more fun than working on a factory line. Honestly.
Very true.
Just enjoy it more. I was quite serious when I was younger, and I recently cleared my attic out, and I found photographs of me looking really 90s with slick back hair and really serious glasses, and oh god, and a suit. What an arse.
Okay, great. That's a good one. I like that. If you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why? Apart from brain scans, I guess.
Apart from brain scans. Oh, the brand. It's a nonsense. It's a really unhelpful word. It means it's like a trump card. You make it to use whatever you want in it. And in fact, it's often an excuse not to say what you think you're saying or to sound as if you're being clever. It's a get out of free jail card. So you say, "Oh, that's not on brand." Not quite sure what that means. It means you don't like it. Doesn't fit with the look. Is that what you mean? Or isn't the values? Or isn't quite how I imagine it would be? Or that could belong to one of our competitors. What exactly do you mean by not on brand? So that's one example of it. Another example of it is that brand sort of trumps everything. You get brand versus commercial. No. And then we make brands things. And, I'm, as you've heard through this whole conversation, and if you read any of my stuff, we come back to this again and again, I think we should focus on the people bit and how they see things, feel things, what they do with it, not us. So, I've ranted in the past about influencer marketing and influence generally. And the influence, quite clearly, if you look at the social science, influence is not something that people do to each other. Influence is something they take from each other. So, I have influenced people is a way of me making myself important. But in fact, what I should be saying is a number of people have taken stuff that I've said or done and found it quite useful and done something with it. That's a bit longer and a bit messier. And it makes me sound less smart, more important. But, so brand is the same thing. And it's just a fat word which is lazily used. And Room 101, ka-ching.
Done. Nice. Right, 2 more. I think we can squeeze these in. Given you've had a reading week in Mallorca, I think this one should be easy. What books can you recommend to our listeners?
So I think there's, I always think the best thing there's stuff in the ad industry and in marketing that's really useful, and lots of other people cover those. Clearly, there are pink books by me, which are all good, but I would look beyond the industry and look for stuff that actually makes you think a bit harder about the stuff that's going to be in front of you. It makes you look out the corner of your eye at what you're supposed to be looking straight on. So, for example, John Campner's Why the Germans Do It Better is a brilliant modern history of Germany, which explains so much about the people that we come across who happen to have a German passport or work in German organizations. I think things like, I'm a big fan of old school but proper academic studies of stuff that Otto English, kind of thing Otto English writes now. So on holiday, I reread this brilliant book by Eric Hobsbawm, who was the father of a friend of mine, and he was a Marxist history professor, ended up at Birkbeck. But it's called The Invention of Tradition, and basically it shows how, in our view of what Welsh national costume is, with those stovepipe hats that women wear, and the complete bollocks invention by Lady Llandovery from about 1840. Kilts and tartan, absolute nonsense. The whole idea of the Highlander dress and the national thing of Scotland, absolute complete invention. It's not just Walter Scott, other people who have their finger pointed at them in this collection of essays. So that was a really good one. There's, hooligan. One, this idea that we have in Britain in particular, that, somehow we're law-abiding and lovely and very conservative and so on, and patriotic and so on. Hooligan was written after the Toxteth riots back in the day in the 70s, and it's written by Geoffrey Pearson, and it basically starts from the recent past and then takes a decade jump each chapter. It goes back into the 18th century, and discover that basically, far from being strangers to mobs and violence, we are brilliant at it. And I first read this book in the run-up to the 2012 Olympics, and joked to someone that we should make rioting an Olympic sport, because we'd be absolutely nailed on for a gold, both in the individual and the team events. So I think that kind of stuff, you should constantly be reading, finding things that look the behaviour that you see in front of you and go, how does that come about? Now, it doesn't have to be non-fiction. There's lots of really good fiction that really helps you understand things that you wouldn't otherwise get to. And one of the novelists I really like most at the moment, and I had a bit of a binge earlier in the year on it, and she's an Indian woman who has moved to Italy, and her name is Jhumpa Lahiri, and she writes absolutely beautifully and really makes you think differently about the experience of exile and identity. Just brilliant. That sounds really sad and awful, but it's beautiful stuff and joyful at times, but it's just brilliant. So I'm basically saying, use books to go and think, open windows into other lives, other people's experience, and how people actually are, and challenge the beliefs that you start with, rather than read things that tell you that things are comfortably Jane Austen.
Fantastic. Well said. Number 4 then, Mark. We always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow or hospital pass that honour, depending on your view, to our guest, who has to give their reason why.
Okay, so I'm going to do this. This will be slightly serious, if you excuse me. I've been quite flamboyant during this discussion. I think I'm going to dedicate this to my wife, Sarah, who died 3 years ago. And just take a moment to deal with that sentence, because if you're lucky enough to have someone who's your best friend and best supporter, look after them.
Well said. Well said, Mark.
Just one other thing that
yes,
we talked before about what the advertising industry does to people, and how I don't quite made it this clear, but I think sometimes it brings out the worst in us. I'm a big fan still of the Specials, and still play in a sort of Specials tribute band, Specials Drat Madness tribute band. And I was very upset 18 months ago by the death of Terry Hall was the frontman. He used to end every gig, despite the violence that was surrounded the Specials when they first started back in the 80s. He used to end every gig saying "love, love, love." Madness's second biggest hit was "It Must Be Love," a cover of the La Bicifri song. And just remember, this stuff that we do is really exciting and really important and can possibly change the world. But at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is the people.
Yeah, well said. Thank you for that dedication, Mark. I can't imagine how hard that was to say. This episode is very proudly dedicated to Sarah.
Thank you.
As a final call to action, feels trivial saying this now, but to wrap the episode up, we will include links to everything we've discussed, links to Mark's books, all of his books and his recommendations. How else can our listeners get more Mark Earls?
You can get more Mark Earls from LinkedIn. I'm on there. There's HERDhq.com I've got the scaffolders in at the moment. We're just about to reopen business there, as that'll have all the historical blogs and so on.
Fantastic. And
links about information that of things I'm doing and things I'm reading and things I'm thinking. There's the HERDmeister on Instagram and HERDmeister on Twitter, although the latter is mostly me shouting about the government being stupid. The final thing is I'm lucky enough to be a fellow of a number of organisations, the RSA, I'm an honorary fellow of the IPA, and the Marketing Society, and I do events for all of those whenever I can. And there's one coming up in a couple of weeks with the Marketing Society, which if any of you are listening to this is thinking, I might be thinking about what happens after the advertising world finishes for me, then there's a session with two brilliant people who've gone from advertising and marketing into become NEDs and board directors of companies that have nothing to do with advertising. So that'll be really interesting. I'm just chairing it and we're going to have some fun. One final thing before we go, if you don't mind, is I'm working at the moment on a book called Time Travel for Beginners, which is about how we think, we might think better about time in this time poor world. I mean, with time poverty comes inability to make good decisions. If you ever had to make a decision in 3 seconds at the end of the night, that decision to have another shot was, a bad one. So I'm doing that at the moment, and so you'll be seeing more from me about time travel on all those feeds, and probably doing some talks on that in the near future. So if you'd like to know more, then do contact me in either the LinkedIn or the website or wherever else. Thank you for having me.
No, not at all. It's been a real pleasure and a real privilege, Mark. I've enjoyed this immensely.
Great, me too.
Finally, thank you to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed the episode, please do share and review our podcast. We really value your support. Keep your questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online, or you can email the mouthful that is calltoaction@gasp.agency.
Can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try and I try and I try and I try. I can't get no call to action. Oh, I can't get no call to action. Yeah, hey, hey.